Story 1. My name is Timothy, and in the summer of 2022, I was working as a traveling sales representative for a medical supply company. This job required me to drive hundreds of miles across the Midwestern United States, often moving from one small town to another via dark state highways. Because my travel budget was relatively tight, I usually avoided major hotel chains and instead looked for cheap, family-owned roadside motels where I could sleep for a few hours before continuing my journey at dawn. Most of these places were run down but harmless. However, there was one specific night in southern Illinois that permanently altered my perception of safety. It was a rainy Thursday evening around midnight, and I had been driving through a torrential downpour for 3 consecutive hours. The visibility was incredibly poor, and my old sedan's windshield wipers were struggling to keep up with the sheets of water. I was exhausted, my eyes were burning, and I knew it was dangerous to keep driving. Just as I was considering pulling over onto the shoulder of the highway to sleep in my car, I saw a dim, flickering neon sign through the trees. It read, "The Whispering Pines Motel." It was a classic L-shaped, single-story motel with a gravel parking lot. The entire place looked dark and neglected, but the office light was on. I pulled my car into the empty parking lot, grabbed my overnight bag, and ran through the pouring rain into the small office. Behind the counter sat an elderly man with a pale complexion and a completely blank expression. He didn't greet me, nor did he smile. He simply slid a paper guest log toward me and muttered the price of a single room for the night. I paid him in cash, and he handed me a heavy metal key attached to a faded plastic tag with the number 114 stamped onto it. He pointed a bony finger toward the far end of the building, telling me my room was the very last one next to the dark woods. I drove my car closer to room 114, parked right in front of the door, and unlocked it. The interior smelled heavily of damp carpet and stale cigarette smoke. The furnishings were ancient. A creaky double bed with a faded floral comforter, a small wooden desk, and an old cathode ray tube television sitting in the corner. The only window faced the gravel parking lot, covered by heavy stained curtains. Despite the depressing atmosphere, I was too exhausted to care. I locked the deadbolt on the door, chained it, checked the small bathroom, and immediately threw myself onto the bed without even changing out of my clothes. Within minutes, the sound of the rain heavy on the metal roof lulled me into a deep, heavy sleep. I woke up abruptly a few hours later. The room was pitch black, and the rain had completely stopped, replaced by a suffocating dead silence. I glanced at the glowing digital clock on the nightstand. It was exactly 3:14 in the morning. I lay there completely still, wondering what had caused me to wake up so suddenly. My heart rate began to elevate as I noticed a strange, rhythmic sound coming from underneath the bed. It sounded like a soft, wet scraping noise, accompanied by the distinct sound of slow, heavy breathing. My entire body froze in terror. I tried to convince myself that it was just a stray animal, or perhaps a pipe, rattling under the floorboards, but the breathing was unmistakably human. It was deep, wet, and raspy, coming from directly beneath the mattress where I was lying. I slowly slipped my hand sideways across the nightstand, carefully avoiding making any sound, and gripped my smartphone. I turned on the screen, using the dim white light to illuminate the small space between the bed frame and the floor. I slowly leaned over the edge of the mattress and shined the phone's light underneath. What I saw made my breath completely catch in my throat. Squeezed into the narrow, dusty space beneath my bed was a grown man. He was completely naked, his skin covered in dirt and old sores, and he was holding a long, rusted hunting knife in his right hand. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and entirely bloodshot, staring straight up at me through the wooden slats of the bed frame. The moment our eyes met, his massive, twisted smile widened, and he let out a low, terrifying giggle that sounded like a broken toy. Adrenaline exploded through my veins. I didn't think. I acted purely on survival instinct. I threw my body sideways off the bed, scrambling across the dirty carpet toward the front door. Behind me, I heard a loud crash as the man quickly crawled out from under the bed frame, his knife scraping violently against the metal legs. I reached the door, desperately grabbed the chain lock, and tore it open, twisting the deadbolt with trembling hands. As I flung the door open, I felt a sharp, burning sensation across the back of my jacket. The man had lunged forward, slicing the fabric of my coat, just as I tumbled out onto the wet gravel of the parking lot. I screamed for help at the top of my lungs, scrambling to my feet and sprinting toward my car. Luckily, I had my car keys in my pocket. I unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and slammed it shut, locking the doors instantly. Through the rain-streaked window, I watched the psychotic intruder step out of room 114. He stood in the dim glow of the outdoor motel light, completely naked, covered in blood from where the rusted knife had nicked his own hand during the struggle. He didn't chase me. He just stood there on the concrete walkway, violently stabbing the air in my direction, laughing hysterically while swinging his head back and forth. I started my car, slammed it into reverse, and tore out of that parking lot at maximum speed. Kicking up gravel and rocks, I drove until I reached a well-lit interstate gas station 10 miles away, where I frantically dialed 911 when the state police arrived at the Whispering Pines Motel. 30 minutes later, they surrounded room 114. The naked man was gone, but the police found a hidden trapdoor concealed beneath the carpet in the back of the room's small closet. The trapdoor led to a dark, narrow crawl space that connected every single room in the motel from underneath. The police discovered numerous pieces of stolen identification, women's jewelry, and several blood-stained clothes hidden in that crawl space. It turned out the elderly motel clerk had been aware of the squatter for months, allowing him to live under the building in exchange for a share of the items stolen from unsuspecting guests. Both the clerk and the psychotic squatter were arrested a few weeks later in a neighboring state. I never stay at independent motels anymore, and to this day, every time I check into a hotel room, the very first thing I do is look under the bed. Story 2. This next story happened to a girl named Vanessa and her best friend, Megan, during a spring break road trip through the desert landscape of New Mexico in 2023. We were both 22 years old and wanted to drive from Texas all the way to the Grand Canyon. By the second night of our trip, we found ourselves on a lonely, desolate stretch of Route 60. The desert night was freezing, and a massive dust storm had begun to blow across the highway, making it nearly impossible to see the road markings. Our car's engine began to sputter, and the dashboard indicated that the alternator was failing. We realized we couldn't make it to the next major city. We needed to find shelter immediately. Through the swirling dust clouds, we spotted a small, neon arrow pointing toward a property called the Oasis Desert Lodge. It was a collection of individual, small concrete cabins arranged around a central courtyard. The place looked incredibly old and abandoned, but there was a light glowing inside the main office cabin. We parked our failing car and walked inside, our teeth chattering from the cold desert wind. The woman behind the desk was middle-aged, wearing a stained apron and smoking a thick cigarette. She looked at us with a cold, piercing gaze that made me feel instantly uncomfortable. She didn't ask for our credit cards or IDs. She simply demanded $50 in cash. Megan handed her a $50 bill, and the woman tossed a brass key onto the counter. "Cabin number 7, she said in a raspy voice. "Don't walk around the courtyard after midnight. We have aggressive guard dogs." We took the key and walked quickly to cabin 7, which was located at the very back of the property, hidden behind a rows of dead cacti. The cabin was tiny, consisting of a single room with 2 twin beds and a small bathroom. The walls were made of thick concrete, and the door was a heavy piece of solid wood with a basic lock. There was no television or phone. We felt an intense aura of isolation, but we tried to laugh it off, blaming our anxiety on the creepy environment. We locked the door, pushed a heavy wooden chair against the doorknob for extra security, and climbed into our respective beds. Around 2 in the morning, the howling dust storm outside finally calmed down. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. I was drifting in and out of a restless sleep when I heard a faint, metallic clicking sound coming from the front door. I opened my eyes, listening intently. The sound came again. Click, click, click. Someone was slowly and methodically inserting a key into our door lock from the outside. I immediately sat up in bed, my heart pounding violently against my ribs. I hissed across the dark room to wake Megan. "Megan, wake up. Someone is trying to unlock the door." Megan woke up instantly, her eyes widening in panic as she heard the metallic noise. We watched in horror as the heavy brass doorknob slowly began to turn. The lock clicked open. The only thing preventing the door from opening was the heavy wooden chair we had wedged underneath the handle. The door nudged forward an inch, slamming violently against the top of the chair. The chair groaned under the pressure, but held firm. From the other side of the wood, we heard a deep, disappointed sigh. Then a low male voice whispered, "The chair is blocking it. Go get the crowbar from the shed." We heard heavy footsteps walking away across the concrete walkway. Megan began to cry silently, her body shaking with terror. Our phone screens showed absolutely no service in this remote desert pocket. We were completely trapped inside a concrete box, and someone was coming back with a crowbar to force their way in. We knew we couldn't just sit there and wait to be captured. I scanned the dark cabin with my phone flashlight, looking for an escape route. In the tiny bathroom, there was a small, rectangular window located high up on the wall, meant for ventilation. It was incredibly narrow, but it was our only choice. "Megan, we have to climb out the bathroom window right now," I whispered frantically. We ran into the bathroom. I climbed onto the toilet bowl, reached up, and pushed the rusted window frame open. It led to the dark, empty desert terrain behind the cabins. I squeezed my body through the narrow opening, scraping my shoulders and stomach against the rough concrete wall, before tumbling out onto the cold sand outside. I turned around and helped Megan pull herself through, just as we heard a loud, splintering crash coming from the front room of the cabin. They were breaking the front door down. We didn't look back. We sprinted into the pitch-black desert, running blindly past rocks and thorny bushes, guided only by the distant starlight. Behind us, we heard men shouting angrily, followed by the deep, terrifying barking of large dogs. The woman's warning about guard dogs hadn't been to protect us. It was a threat. They were actively hunting us in the dark. We ran for what felt like miles, our lungs burning and our feet bleeding from the rough terrain. Eventually, we reached a barbed wire fence that bordered the main highway. We scrambled under the wires and collapsed into a deep ditch on the side of the road. Hiding beneath some dead brush, We lay there for nearly an hour, freezing and terrified, watching the dark highway. Finally, the headlights of a massive commercial semi-truck illuminated the road. We jumped out of the ditch, waving our arms frantically and screaming for help. The truck driver saw us, slammed on his brakes, and let us into his high cabin. He immediately used his long-range radio to contact the New Mexico State Police. When a massive convoy of state troopers raided the Oasis Desert Lodge the next morning, they made a horrific discovery. The lodge wasn't a functional business at all. The owners were part of a human trafficking ring that targeted young travelers. Inside Cabin 7, they found our abandoned belongings, along with heavy restraints attached to the bed frames that hadn't been there when we checked in. The woman at the desk and 2 male accomplices were arrested and faced federal charges. Megan and I never go on road trips anymore. That desert cabin showed us just how easily you can vanish without a trace. Story 3. Our final story takes place during the winter of 2021 in a remote, mountainous region of upstate New York. My name is Ethan, and I was a 26-year-old freelance photographer specializing in winter landscapes. I had spent the entire day hiking through a state park, capturing images of frozen waterfalls and snow-covered pines. By the time I returned to my vehicle, it was already past 9 o'clock in the evening, and a severe ice storm had begun to coat the mountain roads in a dangerous layer of black ice. My vehicle began to slide unpredictably, and I realized it was suicidal to attempt the drive back to the city down a winding mountain pass. I pulled off at the first available exit, which led to a desolate valley road. After driving slowly for a mile, I encountered the Alpine Valley Motor Lodge. It was a classic 2-story motel with an outdoor wooden balcony wrapping around the second floor. The entire property was surrounded by dense, towering pine trees that were heavily weighed down by ice. The parking lot was completely empty, save for an old, rusty pickup truck parked near the office. The environment felt completely dead, like a ghost town frozen in time. I walked into the lobby, where a young man with a heavily scarred face and an incredibly nervous demeanor was working the night shift. He seemed shocked to see a guest. When I asked for a room on the second floor, his hands began to shake as he selected a key. He gave me room 208, which was located at the very end of the second floor balcony, overlooking the dark forest line. Before I left the office, he leaned forward and whispered, "If you hear any knocking on your door tonight, do not open it. Just ignore it." I laughed, thinking he was trying to freak out a city guy with a cheap ghost story. I walked up the icy wooden stairs to the second floor, opened the door to room 208, and stepped inside. The room was freezing, so I immediately turned the wall heater to its maximum setting. The room was standard: a bed, a small table, a dresser, and a large mirror mounted on the wall opposite the bed. I set up my camera gear, made myself a cup of instant coffee using the small in-room pot, and decided to review the photos I had taken during the day on my laptop. By midnight, the ice storm outside had intensified. I could hear the frozen branches of the pine trees scraping against the back wall of the motel like long fingernails. The warmth from the heater made me incredibly sleepy, so I shut off my laptop, turned off the main lights, and climbed into bed. The only illumination in the room was the dim, orange glow emitting from the slots of the wall heater. Around 2:30 in the morning, I was awakened by a loud, distinct sound. Knock, knock, knock. 3 heavy, deliberate raps echoed from the wooden front door. I sat up instantly, the young clerk's strange warning flashing through my mind. I sat in total silence, waiting to see if it would happen again. A few seconds passed, And then the knocking returned, louder and more aggressive this time. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? I called out, my voice echoing in the small room. There was no verbal response. The only sound was the howling winter wind outside. I slowly slid out of bed, walked across the cold carpet, and stood directly in front of the door. I leaned forward and pressed my eye against the small brass peephole to look out onto the second-floor balcony. The balcony walkway was illuminated by a single buzzing fluorescent light. Standing directly outside my door was a tall man wearing a heavy, dark winter parka with the hood pulled tight around his face, completely obscuring his features. He was standing perfectly still, his gloved hand raised as if he was preparing to knock again. But what made my blood run cold was what he was holding in his other hand. It was a heavy industrial axe, the metal blade reflecting the dim orange light of the motel exterior. My heart began to hammer frantically against my chest. I backed away from the door slowly, trying not to make a single sound on the floorboards. Who was this man? Was he a lunatic roaming the mountains during an ice storm? I reached for my phone on the nightstand to call the police. But as I grabbed it, I realized the storm had completely knocked out the local cellular tower. There was absolutely no signal. I was entirely on my own. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. Through the peephole, I watched the man turn around and walk slowly down the balcony walkway, his heavy boots crunching on the ice until he disappeared down the stairs. I let out a massive sigh of relief, thinking the danger had passed. I turned back toward the room, my eyes adjusting to the dim orange light from the heater. As I looked across the room at the large mirror mounted on the wall, I noticed something that completely shattered my sanity. The mirror wasn't reflecting the wall behind my bed properly. In the bottom corner of the reflection, I could see a small, dark circle that wasn't visible on the actual wall. It was a peephole, drilled from the opposite side of the wall, disguised inside the frame of a two-way mirror. Someone was currently standing inside a hidden service corridor behind my wall, watching me right through the glass. Before I could even scream, the large mirror violently shattered outward into the room. A gloved hand reached through the broken glass, desperately grabbing for my throat. From behind the wall, a man was violently trying to pull himself through the hidden opening into my room. At the exact same moment, the front door of my cabin was hit with a massive, explosive force. The man with the axe had returned, and he was violently hacking through the wooden door from the outside. It was a coordinated ambush. The person behind the wall was trying to trap me, while the man with the axe broke down the front entrance. In a state of absolute pure survival panic, I grabbed the heavy metal coffee pot from the desk, swung it with all my strength, and smashed it directly into the hand reaching through the broken mirror. I heard a loud crack of bone, followed by a muffled shriek of pain from behind the wall, and the hand retracted. The front door was now splintering rapidly under the heavy blows of the axe. A massive hole appeared in the center of the wood, and I could see the crazed eyes of the attacker through the gap. With no other choice, I sprinted toward the room's large glass window that faced the front parking lot. I threw my arms over my face, leapt forward, and launched my entire body weight straight through the window pane. The glass shattered completely as I crashed through, tumbling down from the second-floor balcony and landing heavily into a deep, frozen snowbank in the parking lot below. The thick snow absorbed the impact, saving me from breaking any bones, but my arms and face were deeply cut by the broken glass. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the intense pain and the freezing cold, and ran toward my vehicle. My hands were shaking so violently, I dropped my keys into the snow twice, screaming in frustration. I finally unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and started the engine. As I slammed the car into drive and sped out of the icy parking lot, I looked back at the second-floor balcony. Both men, the one with the axe and another man wearing a dark mask, were standing at the broken window of room 208, staring down at me as I escaped into the night. I drove on the icy roads like a lunatic until I found a state police barracks at the base of the mountain. When a heavily armed tactical unit raided the Alpine Valley Motor Lodge an hour later, they found the motel completely deserted. The nervous young clerk was gone, along with the two attackers. The police discovered that the entire motel had been modified into a twisted hunting ground. Every single room had two-way mirrors leading to a complex network of hidden hallways behind the walls, filled with cameras and recording equipment. The owners had been operating an underground website where they filmed the terror and murders of unsuspecting travelers. The suspects were never caught, and they remain at large to this day. I survived by a matter of seconds, and I will never, under any circumstances, stay in a roadside motel ever again.